only going to get worse. They intersect between the main trifecta: conflict, climate, contagion, be they viruses circulating, be they wars being fought, or be they climate chaos. All of these things are intersecting and creating a confluence of cataclysmic events which are going to make our life incredibly more challenging for the foreseeable future, which is why you need to prepare, especially if you live in one of those densely populated cities. A good analogy to understand what's going on is the guy who's deepest in the mind, the guy who's, right next to the gold, who's chipping away at the gold with his pickaxe. That's the most dangerous situation to be in. However, it's also one of the most prosperous when everything is working. But when things stop working, that's the most dangerous place to be in, is the deepest part of the mind. And if you live in the heart of one of these densely populated human hives that we call cities, well, that's essentially where you were. You're getting it while the getting is good, but understand the places where it's best to get it while the getting is good are the absolute worst places to be when the getting gets bad. So I hope that especially all those people who are living in those fancy high-rises and penthouses, if you don't have a plan, then I question your intelligence. It doesn't matter how much money you make. I question your intelligence if you don't have a getaway plan, okay? Now let's just quickly go over the news of the last couple days. I've been busy here, of course, planning my getaway, so to speak, and doing some restructuring, which is why you don't see the whole studio and stuff behind me. We're rebuilding something right now in the process of, so that's coming soon. But anyways, so this is what we got going on. As far as I can see, things are about to heat up once again. The counteroffensive, according to mainstream media, is now in full swing. So this is the main thrust of the counteroffensive, meaning it's pretty much do or die at this point. It appears as though that the mainstream media's support and interest and optimistic prognosis for Ukraine in the conflict is waning by the day. That's quite obvious. But you put nothing past these people in terms of their willingness to twist the narrative and lie and say that Ukraine is doing far better than it is, or if this is just another opportunity to substantiate more support being required in order to help Ukraine fight this battle. But the reason why you know that this war is going to continue for many, many years to come is that the Russians have recently not proposed, but actually made law, the expansion of the draft age from 18 to 30. So they were going to contain it. They were going to move it from 23 to 30, I believe, or maybe it was 22 to 30. It used to be 18 to 27. They wanted to expand that. Of course, they have an aging population. They decided to leave it from 18 to 30, and this is going to take effect in early 2024. The Russians are doing everything they can right now to avoid full-scale mobilization, because right after full-scale mobilization and right after the exhaustion of your conventional forces comes the necessary contemplation of the use of nuclear weapons, okay? And so we're one step away from that with Russian mobilization. The day when Russian mobilization is enacted and starts to fail, that's when we really take a serious look at the use of nuclear weapons being a very real possibility in the conflict. Right now, Russia is trying to walk a fine line with their population. They don't want to create instability. They don't want to disrupt the peace and create civil unrest in their own society. So they're doing this manipulation with their draft laws, because every year another round of conscriptees are taken into the military. It's just a mandatory part of Russian life. You're picked. Everybody's picked, gets their number called once a year, and I think they draft about 150,000 people or something like that. And what they're doing now is they're expanding the draft age. They're likely going to do a lot of this stuff covertly. Anything they can to avoid the full-scale mobilization that they're probably eventually going to need. Because according to numerous people within the Kremlin, Ukraine simply has superior manpower at this point in time. Now, that sounds crazy if you believe the attritional rates being reported by the Russians, who are claiming, in some cases, a 9-to-1 kill rate for Russian soldiers to Ukrainian soldiers. That is, for every one dead Russian soldier, they're claiming they're killing 9 Ukrainians. Now, that's from Russian sources, of course, so I'm guessing that it's not quite that bad. Of course, Russia has a clear technological advantage in this conflict. But regardless, Russia is still saying that Ukrainian manpower is too vast right now for them to completely overwhelm. And if they wanted to take over more of these territories like Kharkov or Odessa, or even take back the annexed territories, much less Kiev or Western Ukraine, they're going to need millions of guys, okay? And so we can see the writing on the wall that that's coming right around the time when that mobilization is going to be kicking into full swing. You're going to have Abrams tanks, you're going to have F-16s, you're going to have closer ties with North Korea. Of course, Sergei Shoigu got the red carpet treatment in North Korea, okay? Unlike anything that I think the West has ever, the West has never had a reception like that in China or North Korea. So to see them roll out the red carpet to Sergei Shoigu in the way they did shows you that they are 110% committed. Of course, North Korea needs food. Russia has a lot of food. They have a lot of energy. North Korea has a lot of manpower. And they also do have a lot of ingenuity. Okay, so they have a lot of weapons. And they have a very large standing army who's been training aggressively for years and years. And although they don't have experience in modern warfare in terms of a high-intensity conflict, of course there was the Korean War, so they do have an experienced military to some degree, but I'm sure a lot of their generals and high-ranking officers have never actually seen real intense combat, because of course those wars were fought decades ago. Nonetheless, you're going to see the solidification of these alliances between North Korea, China, Russia, Iran. They're going to be leading the global south, if you will, against the West. And that is exactly where we are heading. In just the last few days, there's been so many things going on that it's all you need to know is that the situation is getting worse. It's not getting better. If you're a person who has too many things to do and you don't have time to focus on all the minutia of what's going on in the battlefield, essentially what is happening, the grain deal was one of these things that was a bit of a bulwark for peace in that part of the region. It kind of prevented the war from spilling over in the direction of Romania, Moldova, Turkey. Now that that has been officially suspended and is no longer being honored, and Russia is now bombarding those same port facilities, claiming that that humanitarian corridor was being utilized by the Ukrainians in NATO to ship weapons. In fact, they've discovered some boats from Turkey recently have signs of explosives. So the Russians aren't too happy about that. But the war now is expanding greatly as a result of the stopping of the grain deal. Okay, and NATO is going to be expanding their surveillance in the Black Sea. This is a massive area, nearly the size of Ukraine, not quite the size, but it's 0.5 million square kilometers. And so they're going to be having more planes up in the sky, more spy planes, and that means a greater potential for an altercation to emerge between Russian Air Force and NATO's surveillance planes, especially if these surveillance planes are relaying information to the Ukrainians to target Russian positions. Of course, Russia will have no other alternative but to either shoot these planes down or intercept them in some way to try to discourage them from going that deep into the Black Sea. Ukraine has extended martial law in order to avoid an election. I'm not going to talk about the ethics of that and whether it's in line with the principles of democracy. Of course, people can make many arguments about, well, you're in a state of war. This is something that any country would do, but it definitely seems suspicious. If you had such a high popularity rate, why would you ever need to suspend elections? You could say that it's going to tie up resources that the country needs to fight a war, but we're not going to even bother to to discuss, the legitimacy of that. I just think it's somewhat ironic that the country that's supposed to be fighting for democracy has suspended elections and is continuing to impose martial law and send men to their deaths against their will, with no sign of wanting to negotiate on the horizon, because the counteroffensive is in full swing, according to the mainstream media, who appears to be somewhat shifting its narrative from Ukraine's imminent success to maybe not being successful to possible certain defeat. And I'm not sure what the long-standing motive is going to be. Is it just so that they can make the argument that Ukraine needs even more support? With an election coming up in the United States, the Biden administration is going to be tasked with making a decision. Do they get out now and hope that people will forget? Because, of course, we all have such a short-term memory. Do they get out now and hope that people will forget and try to build a campaign around some other issue? Or do they keep the war going? Because, of course, you seldom get a lame duck president when there's a war going on. In fact, most presidents get reelected. So are they just waiting to turn up the heat? Because understand, the Abrams tanks, the F-16s, all of that stuff is going to start to arrive. The Wagner impact on the Polish border, the Polish battalion heading there to the Suwalki Gap, all of these things are going to start to heat up right around election time next year. And it makes you wonder, are they just putting all the pieces together for the big thing to blow right before the election hits? And I know this is kind of a longer prediction, but it seems as though all the playing pieces are being put there for a massive escalation on NATO's borders right around the time that the election is about to start in the United States. So you got the expulsion of diplomats from Moldova. 59 more diplomats were expelled. You have Finland denying entry of Russians into the country. No more visas are going to be issued. You have Russia just unrelenting bombardment using their best weapons, Kinzhal missiles. 10 Kinzhal missiles, none of which were intercepted, but I'm not sure if they're targeting Kiev. We really don't know the effectiveness of these Patriot missile defense systems. I mean, there's been a lot of speculation that the Patriots were taken out. Maybe it's like 50-50. They're taking out maybe a few of these Kinzhals, but not all, depending on the state of entry or the phase of the Kinzhal, where it's at in its trajectory or its pathway or whatever you want to call it. But the Russians are committing a massive amount of resources right now to targeting NATO command centers, or what they view as NATO command centers, to critical infrastructure, priming the ground to make life very unmanageable for Ukraine this winter, and Europe for that matter. Because aside all this war stuff that is going on all around the world, you have this other thing starting to present itself again, and that's the economy and the climate stuff. The hottest sea temperature ever recorded was just recorded the other day in Florida. It was 101 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, that would be great if you're sitting on the beach and you want to dip your feet in there. Unfortunately, sea surface temperatures are off the charts. June was the hottest recorded month in history. The Eastern Interconnect Power Grid was in a level 1 state of emergency for the second day in a row. Records are just falling all over. The Antarctic sea ice is at its lowest since record keeping ever began. And it's looking like July, who's seen record temperatures being broken every single day. The global average temperature, that is, broken pretty much every day of the month. It's definitely on track to be the hottest month ever recorded. And of course, the Canadian wildfires are just off the charts right now. They're in a whole new realm. The average now has been brought up by this year alone. So this, of course, is complicating the economic situation around the world, because this requires more energy for humans in their hives in order to live. And this means that the price of things are going to continue to go up, that inflation is going to get a return. This is why the Fed is persisting with its hikes, with its interest rate hikes, in spite of the fact that it appears as though inflation may be abating, although you're not seeing deflation, which is what you need in order to quell the cost of living crisis and prevent a revolt right now, because the cost of living in the cities, in Western cities, is just absurd. And people around the world are starting to realize this, in Russia in particular. They're starting to realize that while they may not have the fanciest looking cities, and while they may not have some of the amenities that Western civilization enjoys, their actual cost of living and their net wealth at the end of the year is superior, because they're paying less for energy, they're paying less for food, and these are the things that are killing people. They're paying less for rent. It appears as though the housing bubble might be popping, but that's another story altogether. So gasoline has hit an 8-month high. It's very likely we're going to continue to dip into the strategic oil reserve. It's very likely that that's never going to be replenished, because if this weather continues in the extreme ways that it has, of course, contributing, in addition, above and beyond gasoline, but the production of food, which is being complicated in countries like India, where they've suspended rice exports, and this has caused panic buying all across North America and around the world. They suspended 25% of the global rice supply overnight, and it's looking as though this is not going to make a return anytime soon, okay? You have Thailand, who only had one crop this year as a result of climate issues. And you also have Vietnam, who's going to be reducing its exports in the years to come. These are the world's top 3 rice exporters. Rice feeds the world. Rice and wheat feed the world. Now, here in North America, while that may not affect us as much, because of course we are a net exporter of food, the demand for food worldwide increases, meaning that people are going to starve. And when people starve, you have civil unrest, you have civil war, you have continuing massive immigration issues, you have continuing demand for fertilizers, and more energy needs to be input in the system to mitigate the effects of what appears to be a hotter and hotter planet. So it's just a big shitstorm confluence of events. Conflict intensifies as the climate situation intensifies. And then, of course, you still have H5N1 rearing its ugly head. There was 2 cats infected with H5N1 in South Korea recently. So it's still everywhere, which is kind of a non-story at this point in time, because it's being found in so many places around the world right now. MERS, of course, presented itself in Abu Dhabi once again. We have the biowarfare potentially rearing its ugly head with more conflict on the horizon between East and West. So, and now you have the IMF making an appeal that there should be retaliation against India for this export ban of rice. So then you start getting into a trade war of sorts, which only makes the problem worse, where countries are continually going to try to hoard more food, concerned about decoupling, so it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, and of course concerns over World War III. So it's just a bad situation, and the mainstream media is reporting that countries are going to run out of food. Developing countries are going to run out of food, and this is why the summit that Russia recently had with numerous African countries is so critical, because what Russia is actually doing is going to possibly prevent a massive destabilization in Africa as a result of food being too expensive and inaccessible, and thereby doing the West a favor, because you're not going to have boat after boat of immigrants coming over seeking refuge, and due to, their war-torn countries, which are unable to compete and unable to grow food or import food because it's too expensive. That's a very complicated state of affairs in and of itself. Of course, gold purchasing continues to ratchet up all around the world. People are still buying gold. I'm still long commodities because the world needs stuff, and the population is still increasing, and it's going to increase for the foreseeable future, and that means that we're going to need more stuff. It's becoming harder to get stuff because the low-hanging fruit, lots of it has been picked, and that's why we're fighting right now as a species. So that's pretty much the gist of things. The war is on track to get worse this fall, and resources are becoming harder to come by. The cost of living is increasing. We have a very critical, pivotal election coming up here in North America, in the United States, 1 year from now. And I think a lot of things are going to be sorted out, and not necessarily for the better, in the coming year ahead. So I would just encourage people, if you find yourself close to that gold nugget, if you're the miner who's deepest into the mine and you are closest to the gold right now, that is, you are in the heart of the cities where everybody's making money downtown, everybody's driving fancy cars. Well, just remember, you got to have a getaway plan, man, because the closer you are to the gold mine, the harder it's going to be when the shizzy hits the fizzy. And I'd strongly encourage people, if you would be so kind, go and check out some of our other videos that we've been releasing lately that talk about different types of gear and just different solutions for SHTF. We just did a collaboration with Dr. Bones and Nurse Amy where they break down what to do if you burn yourself after a disaster happens and you can't get help. There are solutions, okay? You are not going to be doomed if the grid goes down. There are things you can do to mitigate those situations, and that's what preparedness is all about. So do me a favor and go and check out some of those other videos that don't seem to get a whole lot of attention from either the algorithm or my longtime viewers. I understand people right now really want to know the news, but we got to pair that. I always say this, you got to pair the armchair quarterbacking with doing the actual thing. Okay, you got to get out there on the field, into the field, I should say, and practice your skill sets. But we got a lot of great content coming in the future, my friends. So I can't wait to show you some of the stuff we've been working on, actually, and I just hope that everybody's enjoying what they can of summer. Hopefully it's not too hot where you are. Get out to the beach, enjoy it while you can, because like I always say, this is the pinnacle of Western civilization. This is the twilight. In fact, I'd say that we're well over the hill as a aging civilization. So you better enjoy it while the getting is good, and make sure you have a getaway plan, because the shit could go down any minute. Thanks for watching. Canadian Prepper out.
Well, it's happening just like I said it would, and it's happening right now. People within the Democrat Party are calling for the arrest of conservatives and MAGA supporters. I'm not even joking. In fact, take a listen to this clip on MSNBC.
We're in a battle for hearts and minds, and there are people who are on the fence. You've got to have leaders and messages and messengers and programs that get to those people, that bring them over into community organizing and into nonprofit organizations and away from the